years, welcome back to this class on ESD. So, now today we will start a new area, new topic, that is responsible consumption and production. So, it is related to, it is actually related to this sustainable development goal 12. Okay. So, as you can see, we will discuss about how all of us we can adopt a sustainable lifestyle and sustainable consumption and sustainable production pattern in our day to day practices. Now, let us proceed to the slides. Now, the natural resources, by natural resources, as all of us we know, we mean it towards the energy, towards the living stock, towards the air, towards the natural resources like air, water, then the metal, even the resources are mineral resources like metal ores, rare earth elements, petroleum products, different types of energy resources, water, air, all the living things like forestry, like marine life, all these are the resources, all these are the natural resources. So, now SDG 12 advocate for how to not only sustainably use these resources and consume or develop the sustainable consumption habits and develop the habit of sustainable production also, but how to conserve the resources for the future generation. Not only will sustainably use it at the present time, but we will have to restore it, preserve it, conserve it for the future generation as well. So, that is the SDG 12 advocates for the reducing the ecological footprints. So, it is a natural process that whenever we are consuming the resources, consuming the food products, consuming the other kinds of the goods and material things, etc. So, then automatically as a result of this consumption, some kind source of energy, some source of carbon footprints also coming up. So, how to reduce this ecological footprint, that means whatever we consume, how its impact can be neutralized, how its negative impact can be removed. So, that is where the process we should produce it, we should consume it, it must have the minimum ecological footprint, or you can say zero ecological footprint. So, that is first thing is to reduce the ecological footprint by changing the way of our production and consumption habits. Second is that efficient management of all these resources, whatever natural resources are there in our disposal in this planet Earth, how to sustainably use it, manage it efficiently, so that we can remove, we can dispose all these waste materials, toxic things and pollutants in a very efficient way. So, here the waste management is also another important or potential area of this SDG. So, encouraging similarly the industries and other organizations, business organizations to recycle this waste being produced by these factories and the industry organizations. So, that is the processing, recycling, reducing the waste and waste management through the whole process of waste management. So, creating the again more efficient production supply chain. So, especially in agricultural sector, in food sector, in health sector also. So, how can we efficiently produce it and distribute it with the proper supply chain process to ensure that the food security is restored, food security is maintained, and all the stakeholders, all the citizens, they are having the equal access to these resources, basic resources of life. So, that we can say we can make our economy more resource efficient and robust. So, that we can move towards the more resource efficient economy and the robust economy. Then now these are some of the facts of today's world, like how we are consuming different types of resources in terms, not just in terms of energy, air, water, etc., but also food products, etc. So, this is the data we can see, you can go through it, the how many percentage of people this across the world they are consuming the different types of resources. And this is again similarly the consumption and use of the natural resources, like in terms of electricity from the coals from the from the marine life, and food production from the marine life, then the fuel from the fuel that is from fuel in terms of gas, petroleum products, etc., on the day to day basis. Similarly, food consumption, and is also with regard to the forest resources, other forest resources, and how this resource depletion take place. The resource depletion, that means how the resources are getting deteriorated, getting that means reduces from this in this process of consumptions or over consumption, we can say. So, the resource, this is called the resource depletion. How the resource depletion takes place, like by when, how, whether if you are not sustainably using the forest products, we are not sustainably using the animals, marine life, fruits and vegetables and energy also. So, that creates the situation for the resource depletion. Now, this is again this is the case study of water pollution in India. These are some of the rivers, as you can see, there is the rivers, that how these are being used by the different stakeholders, and what the Central Water Commission says reported that as per the sample from 2/3 of the water quality, the major quality in the India's major rivers are deteriorating, getting contemplated. You must be very much aware of Ganga, Ganga, Sodhan rivers, that means cleansing of river Ganga, how it is taking place. It is a kind of investment by the government of India. So, these kind of things happens here with regard to the natural resources like water, especially the water. So, that is these are some of the challenges, emerging challenges that we are facing nowadays. Like for example, inadequate environmental impact assessment. Whatever we are consuming, whatever we are producing, definitely it is affecting the environment. But how efficiently, how we are measuring it, how we could able to assess it. So, then only we can be able to face the challenge, mitigate the challenges, where try to find out the solutions for its that means depletions and solutions for this kind of problem. So, thing is that how do we assess the impact of this environmental impact of this consumptions and production in the environment. So, that is the inadequate environmental impact assessment. We do not have the sufficient tool for assessing this impact. Unsustained water quality monitoring. Even drinking water is the most important source that we need in our present context across the country. So, what is the water quality, what is the water quality, how this unsustained water quality are being monitored, are going to be processed. So, we do not have efficient now. Gradually we are increasingly using the technology for that, but we do not have sufficient mechanism to monitor and evaluate it. Similarly, lack of decentralized data generation and participatory data gathering. We do not have sufficient data, collective data and being gathered from all the stakeholders and to to interpret it in to get the predictions and assumptions for the water usage. Then low collaborations and buy-in from the private sector. Low collaboration, we do not have sufficient collaboration with the private sectors in the water distribution and etc. Then poor communication with the industry and other stakeholders also with regard to the natural resources. Similarly, inadequate capacity to carry the policy commitments. Whatever laws, rules, regulations and policies are there, we are not being able to committed to or stick to this or follow these or implement these policies and monitor and evaluate it. So, we need more kind of enforcement, legal enforcement. So, low public awareness with regard to sustainability, with regard to conservation of resources, with regard to eco-friendly behavior, protection of our environment, water quality, pollution. So, no conscious awareness among the public is there. So, we have to, that is the biggest challenge, we can say. Insufficient access to green technology, now in the present day context, green technology has got immense importance because to minimize these carbon footprints, to minimize the pollution, and how can we use this technology like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence or other kind, even some robotics or mechanisms like that. So, that how to use sustainably this green technology to reduce these pollutions and to to enhance the quality of life. So, lack of funding and monitoring technology. Yes, funding is also definite, financial resources is most important, and also we must have the skills and competency to monitor, to regulate, to execute this kind of technology and to innovate green technology, and must be aware of its proper usage and its results to be interpreted. So, these are some of these challenges in present day context, how to control the pollution, how to consume the things sustainably, how to restore, how to preserve and how to conserve the all the resources in our planet Earth and the country. So, now so these are some of the, again similar, the data is that industrial waste overview, how this, what is the percentage of industrial waste that takes place in not only because of the industrial sectors, but also the industrial, but also sometimes the natural calamities, disasters, then overpopulation, then overpopulation and pollution due to overcrowd, and the vehicles, the air quality deterioration, all kinds of things. So, again solutions for the natural resource depletion, again the same thing is that, like, make the electricity more useful, more efficient. So, now where more energy efficient bulbs are coming up, energy efficient energy to be used, then more renewable energy, then more sustainable fishing growth, like the marine life, when where fishing is also definitely the food stuff there. So, how to sustainably use that fishing and promote the sustainable growth of the fishing or marine life. So, avoid the single use of plastics, drive less as minimum as possible if you can manage with the two-wheelers or like the cycle and walking, etc. So, how to minimize it. Now, we are also slowly moving towards the electric battery cars, hydrogen cars, etc. So, use again sustainable practices for the agriculture, also sustainable practices for the agriculture, and and again most important thing is that reduce the food wastage. How the food security, in order to enhance the food security, we have to reduce the food wastage. So, food wastage is the biggest setback, this biggest drawback in our consumption habits. So, how to reduce that food wastage, or how the food products should be distributed properly, should be utilized properly, and it should not be wasted, So, reduce the reduce the food waste, that means food products, and to distribute it, to give the even the food is being left out, then how we can distribute among the animals, among the animals and other living organisms. So, promote the sustainable forest management. Yes, of course, forest management is the most important thing. Then the wastewater before discharging. Yes, in the cities life, in the urban cities, wastewater in terms of the drainage problem and the waterlogging problems, all these are because of this wastewater that is being discharged to different rivers and the water bodies in the city. So, how these waste water should be managed properly before discharging it to the environment. So, that is wastewater management, waste management, reducing the food wastage, sustainable agriculture, and sustainable driving, that as much as possible, minimum use of for petroleum vehicles. So, these are some of the practices that we can adopt, we can adopt in our regular day-to-day behavior. And these are the goal, 12 objectives like ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. And under goal 12 also there are so many targets are also there, like 12.1, that is the 10-year implementation of 10-year framework program. Then indicator, like indicator is like target 12.2 is again achieve sustainable management, efficient use of the natural resources. Similarly, the indicators here are like domestic material consumption per capita, and domestic material consumption per GDP. So, these are some of the objectives, goals and objectives of SDG 12. 12.3 also again advocates for the per capita global food wastage and how to reduce it, how to reduce these food losses, okay, along the process of production and supply chains, etc. So, and then target 12.4 environment, that is the achieve the environmentally sound management of the chemicals and all waste products, its life cycle, being through coming out through air, through water, then with significantly reducing the quality of air, water and soil, and to how to minimize this adverse impact of health and the environment. So, they say this. Similarly, the indicators can be here the number of parties to international multilateral environment agreements on the hazardous waste and chemicals, and obligations in transmitting this information as required for the relevant agreement. And 12.5 the target again reducing the waste generation through prevention, reduction and recycling and reuse, Indicator is like proportion of the recycled waste in relation to total collected waste, recycled waste in proportion to collected waste. So, and again now in the big cities also, now the waste materials are being collected individually from the individual household, then being collected, then being processed through technology, through mechanisms. So, waste management has also become you can say is a sustainable practice which has already been started in the big cities, but with regard to the rural areas, remote areas, we need to practice it with our individual and collective awareness, in the sense that we ourselves should dispose it of in a sustainable way, in a biodegradable way, so that the minimum pollution will be created in the atmosphere. So, these again 12.3 also, people everywhere are relevant, they must have the relevant information and awareness for sustainable development by the lifestyle in the harmony with nature. So, ultimately it advocates that we must lead a life, and our lifestyle should go hand in hand with the in harmony with the nature, in harmony with the planet Earth, so that it should be sustainable lifestyle. That means yes, of course, planet Earth is giving us so much of food, not only food, all kinds of resources for maintaining our living. So, but we should not we should be obliged, we should be grateful that we are getting this resources from planet Earth, Mother Earth, for our for our survival, but we should not waste it. So, it's a kind of it's a kind of value we have to create, that as because we owe the gratitude from the planet Earth, because we are living because of planet Earth and its resources. So, hence we should be the caretaker of this planet Earth, we should be the caretaker of all the resources, natural resources, not for us, but for the future generation as well. So, for the whole for the global world. So, that kind of value system, that kind of awareness, that kind of conscience should be developed among us. So, these are some of the images that you can see. The sustainable consumption production, again it is related to everything, it is related to sustainable resource management, again design for the sustainability, then sustainable transport, sustainable production, supply chain and distribution, sustainable, you can say eco-labeling, sustainable procurement. Now, the benchmarks are there, certifications from the agencies, certified agencies are there, like these are the with regard to the quality, similarly sustainable procurement, sustainable manufacturing, sustainable lifestyle, waste management, all these things are. So, sustainable consumption, that means it relates to three drivers, ecological driver, then the social driver, social enabler, social drivers, and the technical drivers like technology, innovation, all these kinds of. So, this is related to one is that our behavior, another is that production, when it is being created, produced, it should be produced in a proper way, sustainable way, and the techniques that are used through technology and other mechanisms. So, these are again this at target 12, A, B, C is continuing. A, it advocates for support developing countries. So, we should, other countries should our UNESCO agencies should support the developing countries to strengthen their scientific and technological capacity to move towards the sustainable patterns of consumption. Similarly, implement the tools to monitor the sustainable development, its impact on the sustainable tourism, and create the more jobs, and promote the local culture, etc. and products. And C is rationalize the inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that encourage the wasteful consumption by removing the market distortions and all the natural circumstances, also including restructuring the taxation and the phasing out these harmful subsidies, and all kinds of things related to strengthen our economy and which accounts for the specific needs and conditions of the developing countries, and the other countries should help them out in not only in terms of resources, but in terms of technology to minimize this possible adverse impact on the development on the environment, and develop and to achieve the development in a very sustainable way. So, these are, you can say, so sustainable consumption and production, it relates to everything, starting from the production to supply chain to distribution to lifestyle to management, to management to decision making to transport to tourism. So, everywhere. So, everywhere we can say we have to make the sustainability as a kind of labeling like the quality level and labeling, and that everything whatever we do, either in tangible way or intangible way, production, consumption, or whatever we are doing, and anything that exists, anything that we consume, anything that we produce. So, everything should be sustainability is a tag, we can say sustainability is a brand, sustainability is a tag, it is a label. So, that should be there in our mental framework, that whatever we are doing, always we should be like the cost effectiveness is a tag for any kind of business transaction. Similarly, sustainability should be a tag, should be a slogan, should be a brand name for all our activities, behavior and consumptions. So, now here again with regard to this, so how these global challenges can be faced, can be mitigated. So, to integrate environmental sustainability with the economic growth. So, economic growth by decoupling the environmental degradation. Decoupling is a sense that by getting it separated, by getting rid of the environmental degradation. So, when we are advocating for environmental sustainability with economic growth, we have to reduce the environmental wastage, environmental degradation because of this economic growth or etc. Whatever we are producing, we are creating, we are consuming, etc. It should be environmentally sustainable in the sense that we have to remove out, we have to reduce, we have to get rid of these and degradation or the negative impacts from the environment. So, resource decoupling and the impact decoupling are needed for the promoting the sustainable consumption and production. So, whatever sustainable whatever goods and things we are producing, not only during the process of production, but during the process of consumption also, we have to minimize, we have to reduce, we have to decouple this negative impacts from this from these processes. So, that a positive transition can be made towards more greener economy, more greener jobs, more global economy and safe economy. So, here another thing is that how to respect the biophysical boundaries of the planet, reduce the current global consumption rates, how to take care of that means instead of deforestation we should adopt habit of afforestation, proforestation, so that to fit in with the biophysical capacity to produce the ecosystem which should be more healthy and beneficial. So, here again how to take care of the biodiversity, how to take care of the natural resources like water, air, quality of air, then minerals or natural resources. So, how to respect, first thing that how to respect for the biophysical resources, the boundaries of the planets, our natural resources, and consume, of course, we have to consume it, but consume in a very sustainable way, so that our ecosystem will be more protected, conserved and safe for the future generation. So, that means we have to, even if with our consumption, so resource depletion takes place, but how to recover it, how to manage it, how to enhance it some other way. So, how can, so all of us we should make effort how to create, even if we are using the resources, but instead of resource depletion, how can the resource creation be possible through some other means and technology and innovative ways. This would be our attitude and the behavior and effort. So, next is a sustainable growth and development, like how to minimize the natural resources and toxic materials and the waste and the pollutants. And so, that is where nowadays the biggest challenge is the resource that means waste management, reducing the resource depletion and waste management. So, that is every industrial organizations, every cities, every municipal corporations, every government agencies, also the waste management, even from our day to day practice, day to day activities, small then different types of waste materials, how these are to be processed, so that not only it will be processed in a very eco-friendly way and an organic way, how does it can be minimized, and again waste out of the waste recycling. So, that is also how to dispose it of, that is also another challenge. So, sustainable consumption and production patterns including all kinds of the measures to be taken, then specific policies, international agreements, not just related to climate change, but all climate change is again it's another is the end result of all these kind of pollutions and the biodegradations and all kinds of depletions. So, how to we have to stick to this all the international policies, agreements and the practices to reduce the toxic outcomes in the environment, and how to toxic materials, how to reduce this, and waste management. So, here these are some of the pictures that you can see how sustainably we can consume the resources, and how we must adopt a sustainable lifestyle in the with the goal or with the target of minimum resource consumption, and with minimum resource consumption and maximizing the profit, and again minimizing the wastage, minimizing the resource depletion in the environment. So, that is why that is societies, they need to find just and equitable ways to meet the individual needs. So, with the ecological limits of the planet, like for example, in our society socioeconomic status is there, but yes, but all of us we should adopt a habit of even though we are very rich, even though we are affluent, even though we can afford, but even then why should we waste our food products, why should we waste in shopping behavior, why should we waste in purchasing unnecessary things, especially in terms of not only in terms of technological gadgets, but also clothes, etc. Rather we should distribute it. What is the purpose of purchasing? That means when you can say that unsustainable shopping behavior, unsustainable purchasing behavior, just because we are affluent, just because we possess money. No, we should adopt a basic policy and philosophy of our life, that even though we are rich, even though we are affluent, but how can we distribute it in a sustainable way among others, instead of buying for our own consumption. Why not to sustainably consume it, or efficiently consume it, or purchase as much as it is required, and rest other things we must distribute among the community, among the people, among the pro. So, that is where the sufficient responses to meet the science based emissions reduction targets, natural resource constraints. These are also some of the sustainable practices with regard to food, water, sanitation, energy consumption should also be enhanced. And as all of us we know, pollution is the largest environmental cause of disease and premature death and all kinds of diseases, etc. So, that is why we must we must adopt that kind of sustainable lifestyle, sustainable habits, sustainable bent of mind, sustainable outlook. So, outlook not just to reduce the food products and not just reduce the carbon footprints, but also sustainably consume the resources, and try to equalize, try to distribute among others who are not getting the opportunity, like especially the food and the clothing, especially food and clothing. So, that we must distribute as much as possible among others. If you can afford to purchase it, buy it, then we must take care of other the section of the society who are actually deprived, who are not getting this opportunity. That is one thing, and second thing is that energy also we should sustainably use it, and the third thing is that how can we minimize the waste products, wastage of our individual, in case of our individual household, and how can we effectively manage the dispose of this our household wastage in a very biodegradable way. So, through different mechanisms, and again how can we not just think of our own consumption, etc., but also we should take care of others in terms of distributing this basic amenities and the food products, and to ensure the food security, and even water consumption also. Not only we sustainably use it, but we can also help out the community people to have access to these basic amenities and resources, and also protect the thing. So, it is not just about consuming sustainability, but also taking care of others by distributing the resources among others, equal accessibility to resources, and ensuring that everybody should get this advantage of these things, but in a cost effective way and in a sustainable way, so that we should not think of ourselves, but the community people, the others who are actually deprived, like the people from the Rajasthan, people from the remote areas where they don't have the access to safe drinking water, or so they are the victim of, you know, they are with the victims, and that they are deprived of these necessities. We must also think for them. So, and how to, and again how to minimize this pollution, not only the air pollution, but also the solid waste management is also an important factor. So, now here I am stopping here. We will continue this in the next class. Thank you very much.